morning, everyone, and thank you very much for being here at such an early hour on a Saturday morning. We really appreciate it. We're going to start with some introductions, but we'd actually also, because it's such a small group, we'd really like to know who you are, just very briefly, and why you have come to our session, and then we'll introduce ourselves. Could we start with you?
Okay. My name is Anil Kanji. From South Africa. I used to have a research program at the HSRC for the last 13 years or so. I recently joined the university and am still literally starting off in my academic career. And also at the University of Technology, so trying to figure out from a research world with unlimited resources to an academic institution where you have 300 students, no assistants, no support, etc. Hoping to figure out how you guys do it.
Which university?
Tswana University of Technology.
I'm Deb Tidwell. I teach literacy education courses at the University of Northern Iowa, which is a teaching Regents institution in the state of Iowa, and work mostly with elementary but some secondary pre-service teachers, and work with some grad students that are practicing teachers in the field.
I'm Catherine East. I'm also from the University of Northern Iowa. I teach in the professional core, so I have pre-service teachers from all areas. And I'm in your session because I'm interested in following Jack's methodology and figuring it out.
My name is Karen Koski. I am an elementary teacher in Fort Collins, Colorado. I'm also a doctoral candidate at the University of Northern Colorado, and I'm looking at dissertation ideas, and one of it is transformative learning with early childhood teachers. So I don't know what you do, and so it sounded like it might be a good fit for what I'm looking at.
I'm Leslie Coyer. I teach at a small liberal arts college for women in Georgia, in the United States, and I'm here because I'm on the listserv, Jack's listserv, and so I feel all this energy coming from me. I want to be here in person.
Okay,
I'm Jody Meyermore. I teach at Luther College in Iowa. And I'm here to learn a little bit about methodology, but I'm sitting back here because I'm afraid to leave early, so I'm just sort of keep going. So.
thank you. Okay, Teresa.
Okay, who am I? My name is Teresa Chislanga. I teach at Comprehensive University, they call them these days, in South Africa. Rural, poor, formerly called the University of Transkei, now merged with Technicons to become university, a comprehensive university. Yeah, the thing about my university is that it's originally set in the former Bantustan, so that automatically makes it a black university, or historically disadvantaged. That's another name for us, etc. So that's why I'm a professor, associate professor for English language studies. I'm also the chaplain for the Catholic students. I have been doing that for more than 10 years. But I think more than that, who am I is the sum total of that and my personal background, which is another story. I'm happy to be here to share whatever.
Thanks, Teresa. Denise?
Thanks. Well, I can identify with Anil. I'm from Durban University of Technology, and I've said to describe my university, I sort of use the words tumultuous kaleidoscope of a university because there's lots going on. And I'm a doctoral student registered at the University of Technology, and we offer slightly different doctoral. We offer more what I would say a professional doctorate degree, a doctorate in technology, and I'm doing it in education. And maybe just a little bit of background. I'm actually from chemistry. I'm a chemistry. I'm a chemistry lecturer, and for me, yeah, the transformation I'll talk about later that's happened within me. But I do academic development at the moment at the university. So I work with a lot of the faculty who are wary because of all the change that is happening in the institution that we need to deal with, change in identity of who we are as an institution, and change in leadership, change in status of the university from the point of view that many of us, when we were employed, 25 years there, when I was employed 25 years ago, it was okay if you had an honors degree to teach because we taught mainly diploma programs. What has happened in the university now, we are moving more into postgraduate, doctorate and master's degree offering, which means there's pressure on us as lecturers to actually improve our qualifications, and that's why I'm registered for the doctorate study on a part-time basis, trying to do that. Just a little bit also about our students. I describe our students as being very fragile, and our students are very fragile, amongst other things, the impact and effect of HIV/AIDS on the community and on the students, and they sit in your classroom sometimes with so much more knowledge than we are aware of and that we can even tap into. So for me, the knowing of the students, the knowing of myself is quite important in terms of where we actually go. So we're moving from a predominantly teaching institution, teaching university, but there are moves for us to move into becoming a research university. And as Anila said, amidst all the no money, no whatever, loss of identity, so all of that, and therefore tumultuous kaleidoscope of the university.
I'm a lecturer, a communication lecturer at the university, Durban University of Technology, the same as Delisha. I teach communication to undergraduate students, and most of the students, 70% almost, of the students are non-mother tongue speakers of English, and 70% of them, 75% of them are first generation university students, so they don't have a familiar background with academia as such, and it's a merged institution from a historically black and historically white. In the apartheid era, the institution has merged, so as Delisha said, comes with a lot of challenges. And I think in terms of the students themselves, from very poor economic backgrounds and socially deprived sometimes, and under-resourced schools and learning systems. So, but I love teaching there, and it's a very enjoyable environment in which to be in. Exciting, in fact. I'm also a doctoral student, a novice researcher, a doctoral student at the University of UKZN, and Daisy is my supervisor.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Daisy. I work at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and with my colleague here, Kathleen, we especially work in the area of teacher development studies. Okay, a little bit about my university. I'm also coming from a situation where we have the University of KwaZulu-Natal is actually out of a merger of two historically racialized universities. One was historically white and the other being historically black, which is where I come from. So I currently work in the School of Education that is now within the new merged institution of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I mentioned that with a great emphasis on how research drives the work we do. Our university prides itself on the vision that we are a premier university of African scholarship. And while teaching and learning is our core responsibility, we are measured at the end of the day by research. And in keeping with that, the national priority right now for South Africa is to increase the number of graduates to replace what they say is an aging cohort of people with PhDs, to a breed of scholars. And so we're trying to align our vision with that plan to say, okay, we need to provide the support. But also with the ASIF report, which is a widely published report in 2010, further emphasizes the need to provide a coordinated plan to support postgraduate supervision and doctoral study. That we are actually underperforming in that regard. So my core responsibility in the faculty then is to support supervision, to actually, as a way of then providing this new generation of scholars that they want. But in supporting supervision, my greatest challenge is to develop capacity for that, which is what the ASIF report is saying, to show that you're developing capacity for support for supervision. And my being here is to share with you some of the ideas that I'm struggling with and trying to make sense of in developing my capacity to be a supervisor for sub-study research, which is actually different from supporting, from being a supervisor in a traditional one-to-one supervision. Thank you.
Thanks, Daisy. I'm Kathleen Charles-Morgan, and I'm also at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and I work with Daisy in teacher development studies. I think you'd have got a sense from these introductions of the kinds of challenges facing higher education in South Africa. We have these newly merged institutions that have joined together people who've had very different educational experiences and backgrounds. There are a lot of challenges we're facing, particularly socioeconomic challenges. We have a lot of very poor students who are actually hungry. We have feeding programs at a lot of our universities. We have a lot of students who are affected by HIV and AIDS. We have only 30% of our academic staff across the country have PhDs at the moment. So there's a really big drive to make sure that all staff have PhDs, which is one of the reasons why we've started this project, the Transformative Educational Studies project. So one of the aims of the project is to support staff members at our 3 universities in upgrading their qualifications. Some of them are doing masters, some of them are doing PhDs. The other important element is improving teaching and learning. So these are self-study masters and PhDs, people who are really committed to improving the teaching and learning in our 3 institutions. Self-study in South Africa is quite new as a methodology. I think the first PhD graduated in 2008. And since then, we've had a few others, and there's definitely a growing interest. And I think the growing interest is because of the challenges we face and because of the need we see to improve teaching and learning and to face the socioeconomic challenges as well. So teaching and learning isn't just about academics, it's about how do we provide the range of kinds of support that our students actually need. So the self-study project, we put in a grant application in 2010 to our national research funder. We were very unsure as to whether we would succeed because there'd never been a self-study project funded by them before. But we were very fortunate, it was funded quite generously. So the project provides funds for a number of our students, our masters and PhD students, to support their research. And it also provides us with some funds to hold workshops. So we've had, since the project started in 2011, we've had 3 workshops where we've brought together staff from our 3 institutions. We've had between 40 and 60 staff members at each workshop. We try to be really inclusive, so even people who are not necessarily registered for a master's or a PhD are very welcome to come, explore, find out what we're doing. The workshops it's been quite a challenge to organize them because we've got a range of people, some doing masters, some doing PhD, some just interested in studying further. A few of us have perhaps done a master's or a PhD using self-study, but most people are newcomers to self-study, so it's a real range of experience. We've been very fortunate. We've had Claudia Mitchell from McGill University who did our first workshop where we looked at using visual methodologies, and we had some examples from graduated PhD students of how they'd used self-study in the South African context. Second workshop, we had Jackie Joan with us, which was fantastic. And then the third workshop, which we had this year, we had Anastasia Samras and Mika Lunenberg, who gave us a really nice introduction to self-study and took us through. So we're providing a range of kinds of support. So we have these inter-institutional workshops. Also at our various institutions, we have regular meetings of staff who are either studying using self-study or supervising self-study. We come together on a weekly basis at the DUT, on a monthly basis at UKZN, and they're just starting off to come together at Walter Sisulu University. We also have a number of online classrooms and email listservs where when we can't get together, because we are physically very far apart, some of us, we try and use the internet as a way of keeping together, although that is a challenge because particularly at Walter Sisulu University, their internet access is very limited and erratic. So we're overcoming a number of challenges, but the point is to try to build a community, a learning community of staff members who are supervisors and also students in a way that will be as supportive and also challenging as possible. And I think what we are studying the process as we go. We're only a year into the project, and we're still quite new because our students are part-time students. They get 3 years to do a master's or 6 years to do a PhD. So in the first year, generally they've worked on their proposal. So that's where most of our students are at the moment, is they're still working on their proposal or they've submitted their proposal. So we don't yet have a database of completed studies, as it were. That's what we're working towards. We've got 3 years of funding at the moment, but we're hoping to extend it to 6 years so that we can actually support our PhD students right through to the end. But we are studying the project as well as a whole, so we're collecting data through videoing the workshops, through getting evaluations of every workshop. We also have email correspondence, we have the listservs, we're documenting all of that. And I think what we've found so far, which has really struck us, is the value of this kind of self-study learning community in an interdisciplinary space, because the first self-studies were done in teacher education, but now we have people from fine arts, jewelry design, accounting, business studies, drama, you name it. We're pretty much across the spectrum of academic and professional disciplines. And what our participants have said over and over is that richness, that multiplicity of perspectives has really been valuable in terms of exposure to different methods, different ways of thinking, different literature. It's really helped all of us to expand our academic horizons and think about what we do in different ways. And the other really important learning that's come through is the value of doing self-study research in a community. And that's what our supervisors and our students have said, because self-study is still a very new methodology. It's something we have to defend on a regular basis, which I'm sure you can relate to. And it's not a bad thing, because it means that every time you talk to somebody about what you're doing, you have to become clearer and more convinced that this is why you're doing it and what you aim to do. But it's much easier to do that if you've got a cohort of fellow students or supervisors to work with you. And that's what people have really acknowledged, is that it's wonderful to have a community at each institution and also across the institutions, and to have a space where you can perhaps have some respite from the pressures and the tensions of your particular institution. When we come together in our workshops, it's a wonderful space. We have fun, we really enjoy it. We're challenged, but at the same time it's a very supportive space, and it feels like a very safe space. Also, because we are all colleagues, as well as being supervisors and students, it's quite an unhierarchical space, I think. where we're all learners. Although some of our supervisors are very experienced and they've graduated many PhD and master's students, most of them are quite inexperienced with self-study. So they're also learning as we go, learning with their students. So that's created a really interesting dynamic in the group, and one in which supervisors and students work together rather than some of us being expert knowers and others being unknowing, as it were. So I think that's I think what is most important for me to tell you about the project, but at this point I'd like to invite you to ask any initial questions that you might have, anything that I haven't made.
Give an overview of what self-study is, the components of it.
Well, just very briefly, the research question that underpins the studies in our project is how can we transform our educational practice? And we, as you see, we're in a range of institutions and a range of disciplines, but that's what drives us. We all realize that there's a need for constant improvement and change to meet the range of challenges. In terms of methods and methodologies, it would be difficult for me to go into all of that now, and we have some experts here with us who I'm sure you could chat to also. But we, there's a range of methods that you can use in self-study. We try and use a lot of arts-based and creative methods, which is enhanced by the fact that we have many artists among us, fine artists, jewelry designers, people like that. So that's been really exciting and useful.
Can I just ask? It's just that I don't know there's a bit of slippage in terms of the how do we transform, because in response to the question, Kathleen said, how do we transform? And my understanding of the project and proposal, how do I transform my educational practice? So there's a really interesting relationship, I think, between the I and the we. Is it okay?
Yeah, I suppose there are individual studies, but at the same time it's a journey that we're going on together, although we're in different contexts and different disciplines. Anybody else?
Kathleen,
Yes.
I wonder if when we were chatting yesterday, there was some discussion around policy changes that have not been recognizing the nature of the problems in your lives. And I think Daisy in particular was talking about that. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, because that's certainly a global issue, but I think it's much more complex in your context.
Can I just add to that? Is the focus also on, is the focus only on my educational practice, or our educational practice, or on the environment in which we're working as well that impacts on it?
Okay, well, I'll start with Anil's question. I think, we have, in our project, we have 22 master's and doctoral students who are also university educators, and each one of them is asking that question in whatever form they've taken it up in. How can I transform my educational practice? But you can't understand how your educational practice is evolving if you don't understand the context. And whatever you do in terms of your practice is obviously going to impact the context. So it's not a decontextualized question, and it's very much in response to the challenges, the pedagogical challenges that are brought about by the context. Is that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I can very merrily change my practice, sit in my corner and do my teaching and do my research and adapt to whatever needs to be adapted. And I don't know, that's what I think I can do. Work in the bureaucracy that it needs to be working, do my own funding, and really don't matter or care about what happens on the other side, because it's too difficult to deal with, or it's too bureaucratic, or whatever the case is. I think that there's a difference.
Perhaps, but
answer that question, as I understand it from a totally novice research point of view, I think the purpose of self-study is not only to look at my own practice, that's part of it, but it's to look at the other. So it needs to be inward-looking in order to examine how I can transform and change how I do things and why I do things, why I'm making those changes, with a view to looking at how can I improve my students, how can I improve in order for their learning to change. It must have an influence on a wider audience. And I think the purpose of self-study is to look out there rather than, it's not the navel-gazing situation, but rather it must have impact and influence, or it ought to have, on a broader institutional level, hopefully bring about policy changes. I don't think it's a self-centered type of as I understand the research. It's just mine.
Well, I think just looking at the theme of this particular sitting here, starting with ourselves, the challenges have been articulated more or less. Now, what do we do in that space where we are challenged? So then we start with ourselves. What is it that I, in my space, with my experience, with my challenges, what can I do to impact the challenges and the situation in order to help the students that I know? You know, I know where they're coming from, I know their situations. What is it that I can do? I mean, my own personal experience is that we are so well trained in the traditional sense as university teachers. You are never trained how to teach in a university. You're just given your PhDs. You have your PhD, therefore you can teach in a university. And you find that it doesn't work like that, because especially if you went to school a few years back, like in my case, you just went to a lecture and you stood there, a man or a woman walked in and lectured and walked out. They were not really concerned whether or not you got anything out of it. And they left. And what I have found out that I might have been lucky to have grabbed something and gotten to where I am today. But I can see that my students are not grabbing anything. Maybe their challenges are more. So the question is, do I continue because I believe in this thing that I hold to do because this is the way it is done, and simply continue even when I can see that it's definitely not working for this generation, or perhaps for the environment where I am now. So what can I do to contribute to a transformation of that situation, to help this situation, the students of this generation and this environment? So I start with myself, and I think I am at that beginning. I am one of the novice, I mean, real big novice in self-study. So I'm just beginning to look at myself with that hope of outwardly influencing my situation now.
Yes. Should we just do a question about policy?
Jackie, you want to know more about the policy or how at our institution we...
Yesterday you were talking about your concern about how the policy changes are being made without anybody thinking about the values inherent in their own values and in the values of the people around them. It was just magic.
Yeah, no, I think it's what drives me as an academic, and also coming specifically from South Africa. I mean, you all know that we've been through a history that damaged us in many ways, and I think education was a consequence of that has really suffered badly. I mean, we have 80% of our population that have an educational background that just doesn't work for them. So, and in the past 17 years, I mean, there's so many policy changes wanting to address education. That we're very good at creating very nice policies. They're actually very good to read. They make absolute sense. But actually, they take on a very, very technical flavor because the people that have to make sense of it relate to it in a very meaningless way because they themselves have not changed and rework the meanings that they carry with them into this new space that we are in. And therefore, the change is meaningless. These policy changes that we have to engage with becomes a meaningless task. And therefore, we keep asking ourselves, why is there no change? Why are schools still... Because you see, the teachers that are in those spaces have not had the time and the space to unlearn and to find out what do they need to leave behind in order to move forward. And that's where the biggest problem is. In order to move forward, we have to get rid of some of the baggage that we carry, the meanings that fit into that bag. And therefore, we can continue with the policies. And I think it's a global phenomenon. We will ask the same question until the cows come home and our faces get blue. We're not going to change because the change is not happening at an individual level about the meanings that we carry with us. And we can apply that to any situation.
Can I just get this policy issue? We actually counted the number of policies that were, policy and policy texts that were promulgated from 1986 to 2008. 160.
Change education.
Yeah, that does sound a phenomenal problem. We do want to hear across from other people's perspectives. So can we move away from Catherine's overview and invite Wendy and Daisy to present this next? And there will be further opportunity to ask questions as we go on, but otherwise we're going to just get focused on this particular dimension.
Right, thank you. Firstly, the question is, how am I being transformed by the process of self-study? As a novice researcher and as a practitioner, educator in the communication course at the University of Technology. Well, firstly, I'd say it's transforming me, the self-study process is transforming me in terms of my understanding of my contribution of both my personal and my professional life experience. So I value knowledge, I value learning, but I never thought of it as my experience being a rich source of knowledge and a different way of interpreting reality. And so that has allowed me to ponder on what my life experience has equipped me for. And although I'm a white lecturer teaching majority second language students, black, Indian, African students, I feel that my life experience has enabled me to see things and to experience things and to understand it in such a way that I can draw meaning from that. So that's been interesting. This epiphany, if you like, came about when I had a situation in my classroom. I walked in business as usual. I had a test, I was busy, and a student was sitting on the floor. And I was quite taken aback. And I said to her, please sit at a desk. I can't have students sitting on the floor, especially when we're writing a test. And she didn't move, and her face was completely expressionless. And I looked around the class, there must have been 35 students in the class, and I would say half of them knew exactly why she was sitting on the floor, but no one responded. It was this non-expression, if you like. And I walked out of that classroom feeling so confused. A million thoughts raced through my mind. I've been a lecturer for so many years, but nothing of my experience actually equipped me for that situation. And I left there and I asked one of my colleagues, and I think that's the beauty of collaborative research and working with colleagues. And she said, oh no, she's a Tswasa, a trainee Sangoma, a trainee witch doctor. Although we say Sangoma, but it's a medicine man, if you like, a spiritual healer in the African community and culture. And the reason she was sitting on the floor was that those are the cultural norms. You only allowed to sit on the floor, you're not allowed to sit at a desk. So I think when I left there, I realized all my life experience as a lecturer in many different situations, multicultural settings, even other countries where I've taught, that had not equipped me. And so I had to ask myself questions. Do I really know my students? How well do I know them? And how well has my teaching, my training, how well has that actually equipped me for what I'm doing right now? The relevance, post-apartheid South Africa. And so self-study started enabling me to ask those difficult questions. And I had to ask myself, is this where Jack's living contradiction comes into it? Jack speaks so clearly about a living contradiction, because my value is to honor students and to respect each person's culture, if you like, each person's ways of knowing and expressing themselves. But in that situation, it wasn't working. And I thought the very value that I hold dear to, I don't see it being enacted in my classroom. So that was a living contradiction. And self-study enabled me to see that, to view it. And another thing, in terms of my practice, I had to ask the difficult questions that one needs to ask when you reflect. And I think I'd resisted.
And an interest in developing games for learning. This is a higher education institution, games for learning. And suddenly there was this whole risk element that these lecturers were taking, because they were bombarded with games aren't played in higher education. This is about serious learning. And for me that created a problem, because for me I love to enjoy what I'm doing. And I love to do what I enjoy doing. So I sat there and I said, but I could see these lecturers. I mean, as I said earlier, they were weary, tired, all this change in the institution. But suddenly, doing these academic development workshops in active learning, I found that there was this joy, there was this light, there was suddenly light, and they were doing more work. So even though they were doing more work in developing games over and above, I mean, as part of my study, I've got 6 other lecturers that I am looking at their practice as well, and the influence of my joy, my support on their practice, and in terms of what is actually happening. And I find that when there is joy, when they are loving what they're doing, when there's pleasure, there is the learning. They're prepared to go to any lengths to do whatever happens. How does that relate to me as a doctoral student? My relation with my supervisor. When there's that joy between us, we sit and we have off-campus meetings at a coffee shop, and those are supervision meetings. And we discuss what it is we are actually doing and the joy that is there. And I found how I'm learning the process of undertaking research and doing research. So for me, I value that aspect of people enjoying what they're doing, and they'll do it, and they'll do it successfully. And that I discovered through my own studying my own self, my own learning, and looking at my exposure. And until I enjoyed what I was doing, I didn't learn any longer. And as mentioned earlier, I was a chemistry lecturer. And that was a huge shift for me, coming into self-study. Because my supervisor keeps saying, now take off your chemistry hat. Forget about chemistry now. You're not measuring how many moles and molecules and whatever. You're not measuring this. This is something else you're dealing with. So for me, that change and that transformation in terms of as a researcher that I had to undergo was kind of, you're not measuring things the chemist does meticulously. You're suddenly looking at different things. And that transformation for me is now my story, my knowledge, my experience, who I am, know thyself, and then that can forever be true. And I think, okay, hang on, do I really know myself? And I found through the self-study, through looking at what happened to me in my chemistry, where was I, what type of researcher, what type of person was I as a chemistry lecturer, and then I made the change and I become an academic developer. And how do I make that change, and how does my practice then get influenced? And therefore for me, when I went back looking at active learning, I decided, hang on, but there's something more about this active learning. What is the activity? What is the active in active learning? And then my chemistry came back into the folder briefly, because then I started saying, hang on, there's something happening within my being as I'm learning. There's something happening. There's something that is happening to me when I'm learning. What is it? What is the change? Where is the change? And then Candace Pert came out with the whole notion of molecules of emotion. The fact that we are hardwired for pleasure. All our neurons, all our neuropeptides, what is actually happening? Where are these things? I started then, my chemistry had sort of came back in a little bit to say, hang on, what is this neuropeptide chemistry all about? Where does it work? How does it work? And the fact that our neuropeptides are not only in our heads, our neuropeptides are through our whole being. And actually when you look at the work of David Gershon, he talks about your stomach having the next highest concentration of neuropeptides. So if there's such a huge concentration of neuropeptides, can I link that to how the learning, you know, sometimes you just know when you know, and where do you know it? Sometimes we believe we know it here, but actually we know it here, isn't it? You just know that you know, and you say, okay, I know, and so tell me about it. And for me, that has been some of my challenge in the doctorate. I know kind of something, but I don't know what it is that I know, and how do I know it? And so for me, the work of Marcel Just came important here, because Marcel Just talks about the laws of expression. And he talks about the manual corporal. In other words, the knowing in your whole being. Your whole body knows it, and your body feels good about knowing something. And for me, that is important, and understanding that. And self-study was determining what is it in my being that I know, and how do, I don't know everything yet. There's things that I know that I don't know, things that I don't know that I know. Anyway, and so for me, that manual corporal, knowing in your viscera, in your being, in your whole body, you know that something is right, or you know that something is not right. And then he talks about when we are able then to express it, what we know. So our laryngeal buckle, he talks about, our expression. So sometimes you know and you need to express it. How do you express it? And only when you start speaking about it and listening to yourself and listening to others that they are saying, then you start gaining your understanding and gaining, helping people to create the knowledge as they speak, as we share today, and we ask each other questions. What is the big challenge then? The big challenge for me is the written, because what Marcel Just talks about, he says, yes, we can know in our being, we can talk about it, but the issue is the writing. And keeping that written text and making, what Jack says, making public. So yes, we can make public our performance, we can make public our speaking, we can make public our being, but how do we make public our writing? And for me, the self-study, when I go into the self-study method, looking at the narrative inquiry, the writing, looking at my personal or my autobiography writing, and how that has helped to, by layering it, starting off with a story, and realizing, hang on, there's more to the story. I put another layer on it. Okay, how does this then contextualize to my study and where I am? Adds another layer into it. So for me, all those layers, all those only comes through writing. And as part of a doctoral journey, that has been one of my biggest things that my transformations is to try and get the writing. You know, coming from chemistry, equations, A plus B equals C, and you see it, and it's finished. And suddenly now you got to start writing in self-study. You got to say, okay, so this whole issue of what Marcel Just is talking about, I've got to be able to express it in words. How does that visceral knowledge that we have, how do I actually display that? So for me, that journey of then led me to learning, to understand learning as a biochemical process. It is something, there's a biochemistry, and the molecules of emotion that are running through you, that you just know you're sitting here and you're feeling good about being here, that is part of it. And that is part of the thing that helped me to understand in terms of the self-study. So for me, in terms of loving what I do, in terms of being in a supportive environment, those are the things that are key. And at our institution, we have on a Friday afternoon, MPR. I spoke about our body, viscera. One of the main things there to support us is the food. Is we gather around the table every Friday afternoon, sharing a little meal. And it is in sharing that meal we understand each other's values. We start listening to each other, we start sharing our values, we start hearing each other's stories, and that values then we become values driven, to start finding out, hang on, how do we share? What values do we share? Who else loves what we're doing? Who else is supportive? Who else has respect? Who else has this energy, this loving, dynamic energy that we can have between each other, Joe? This loving, dynamic energy that we can have. And that has helped us to grow. Because in that whole tumultuous institution where everything else around and about us is falling off and doing a whole lot of things, that safe space, I think Kathleen spoke about earlier as well, is the space we need to grow. And it is only in sharing and in collaboration, in collaborative work that we're doing, we can then grow and get going. If I was sitting in an office by myself, doing my practice, improving my practice, so what? In this case, we find that we're actually sharing that improvement in our practice. So what is happening in the institution? People are starting to say, hang on, what's happening there? Let's work together in professional development. Let's see how we can start improving. What are you doing? What is happening? Is it working? How do you know it's working? Besides looking at throughput figures of 20% passing and doing it, there's more to it There's actually the enjoyment, there's what is happening in that space, in your learning environment. So yeah, that's my second point. Thank you.
I'm sure everybody's found it very fascinating presentation. I'm sorry to cut off questions directly to
No problem.
now. But I think we need to give Jack some time, as discussing, to make some comments. And if we do have time at the end, I'll open it up again. I hope that's okay.
Wonderful.
Okay, thanks, yeah. No, I'll make sure we've got some time, for more conversation, because some people came in, where people don't know. For example, John Walton came in late. Yes.
Trying to make it feel bad.
Director of the Centre for the Child and Yet family at Liverpool Hope University. He was really interested. Yeah. Is there anybody else that didn't get to introduce themselves? No? At the back, yes?
Rick Van Alstall from Middle Tennessee State University.
Rosa Chiu from the Hong Kong Institute of Education.
Oh, great. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah.
Renee Clift, University of Arizona.
I'm Michelle Sippel. I'm a student at the University of British Columbia.
Okay, that's great. And somebody may know Deb Tidwell, because Deb edited a really good book on methods for self-study research. Okay. Okay, and
I'm Martin McCall.
My discussing comments. I've already put one draft on the web, so if you look at the actionresearch.net website, you can just access the original proposal that was successful for the Transformative Education Studies project, and just underneath that, I've just drafted out some of my discussing comments, because in many ways, what I now love to do is to take the video of this session and respond, because so much seemed to me to come out of what you were saying. So, for example, as you talked, Daisy, about arousing the desire for that transformative sense of identity. Now, I don't know if that sent just the back of my neck just went like this. And it was that feeling, of course. Now, there's somebody who isn't here, when Alicia was talking about that end of love and joy, I just felt that Joan Connolly's presence, because Joan is at the Durban University of Technology, she helped to originate this proposal. And I know the energy that Kathleen and Joan brought into this. It just feels to me that when you talk about the love and joy, what I'd love to be able to do from the video is to make a response to you all, linked in with Wendy, as you were talking about knowing your students, because you were saying that was a real revelation to you, that sense of transformation. So that I can start to bring in not just your own individual contributions, because I looked at the camera that where Jackie was taking, and of course you're all speaking to the room. Yet the fact you're here, and I asked Jackie if she would just pan round, because if you think before 1994, I don't think this would have been possible, would it? Yeah, and yet we're just taking for granted, as if this were really quite natural, that you're all from different groups, different heritages, but it just felt that you were one, you were in community. Now that itself at the moment hasn't been highlighted, simply because as we speak individually, and Teresa has got, I think, it's fantastic, and I've said this to you before, Teresa, that embodied sense of being together in community. And you talked, I think, Daisy, of an African scholarship. So there's just something there about the quality of the relation which Kathleen stressed with that sense of community, which I do think I might just be able to take the video and point to some of the really important qualities that you're expressing simply by being together here at AERA and presenting. And there's just one other point, and then we could open it up, if you like, to the, just the responses. And it was this, that there can sometimes be a bit of slippage between that question, how do I transform my practice? And I know that's a really important response, Kathleen, that gave, which is, how do we transform our practice? So the we was there. And then if you look at all the questions, because this is the first year of this project, where the original proposal had this question, how do I transform my educational practice as? That was the generic question. Now, a year into the project, the questions are, how is the process of self-study transforming me? Now, those are very different kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. And it's just now, I think, that I was talking to Kathleen yesterday on the group, it's the focus is now, I think, beginning to be able to switch on to that front. How do I improve my practice? But I think I think, Teresa, you really do have got a sense of an I that is actually are part of the sense of the African sense of Ubuntu. I am because we are. So it's not the individual autonomous I of the Western Academy. Your I involves the neighbourhood and others. So that is something I'd love to do after this session, take what Jackie's done and see if I can keep this conversation going as part of a discussant's response, and then see if how it develops. Is that okay? Just as a... okay, John. We could then, just open it up to any kind of questions, and so you've got time just to feel that we have participated. Many thanks indeed.
Thanks, Jen. I mean, provided we don't have to rearrange the room.
We don't.
We don't.
We don't.
No.
So we've got 5 minutes, and I don't know if Kathleen, you still want time to wrap up afterwards or not. But, no, okay. So we can open it up to the floor again if there are any questions people want to raise. Jane.
It's more a comment than a question, really. And I mean, I've just been fascinated, obviously, with what you've done, and it's just great to sit and listen to the experience of your self-study, because it was a huge achievement, wasn't it? I was a reviewer for the actual initial proposition, so to hear that you got that and were working with it very successfully was great. But I was just talking with Jack last night, and you're raising really interesting issues in relation to my own research and what I'm doing at the moment, and I don't know whether you'll be able to come to my presentation this afternoon, but the key thing that I'm really playing around with and I'm trying to understand at the moment is this relationship between the individual and the collective. So I'm working very much as you are with a group, in my case it's early years practitioners, but they're doing kind of self-study, they're exploring their own journey, their own values, something that's very new to them because they're not academics, they're not even in the academic world, but they've really got into that. But in doing that as a group, as a collective, they're finding that something really shifts in the sharing of their individual journeys with each other. And so what I'm trying to explore at the moment is when individuals are doing that with huge integrity for themselves and in themselves. So, that is very, in a sense, pure to themselves, but then they start listening to and sharing their own individual self-studies with others. There's something very, I'm almost inclined to say magical, but it's certainly transformative happens in the two of them coming together. So I'm really trying to explore what it is that happens, because and I'll say a little bit more about that this afternoon, but I think you've touched on it quite a lot, and I was interested in your question earlier on, because I think you were saying I make plans and I try to do things, and I change them, and for me it's enough. And I'm saying, well, yes, anybody who's doing any plans for themselves and trying to do something like that, you can do that in your own right, and it's okay. But actually, for me, my experience is the change is limited. It reaches a point, whereas when you begin to engage in that process and do it collaboratively with others, the shift becomes a lot bigger, both for the individual and for the collective. And I think we've got a long way to go before we fully understand what that process is about. But actually, I think it's a really exciting one. So.
Anybody else want to either ask a question or make a comment?
I'm limiting how I know something. But the moment I put it out to a collective, that opens up a whole range of other meanings to what I think I know. And it's risk-taking, because you actually say, I only know so much about this on my own. But actually, the same issue when put out on the table with 5 other people are giving me 5 different perspectives on this. And it's a vulnerable moment, but actually it's a very rich moment. Because in that space, when you put it out, obviously it's a safe and a comfortable space where you can throw out your idea. But it's a vulnerability that becomes the site for new learning. And that community, that collective space becomes a learning space. And I think you go back to your individual classroom knowing a little bit more. You've opened up how you think about things. And I think the individual collective must always be seen relationally. I think Otherwise, we close ourselves up. We run in circles. And it's safe to do that, but I think as academics, it's dangerous.
Well, I'd just like to thank each of you for what I found extremely stimulating morning. And I think what's been very special is that quite often in the self-study we hear about individual activity. And here we've actually had a group, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, there's 40 people beavering away out there in South Africa on a scale and in very challenging circumstances. And I think you've been tremendously courageous, firstly, to actually try and get the research bid, and for what you've chosen to share with us at this very early stage. And I'm sure everybody in the room would want to wish you well for the next stage of what you're doing, because I think it could be incredibly significant. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to just add that we have a gathering for the self-study